Hey friends, if you're using Playwright for end-to-end testing or synthetic monitoring with Checkly, you might have noticed that Playwright is running your end-to-end tests super speedy thanks to auto-weighting and web-first assertions. But sometimes you actually want to slow down a little to see what's happening in your browser end-to-end tests. And that's what I'm going to show you in this video. Let's go. As always, we're here in my Playwright example project in a login spec.ts file that includes a single test case that is called login validation works. And this test case navigates to checklyhq.com and clicks around a little bit, and then it enters a wrong password into the login flow to test if the text email is invalid is shown in the validation flow. And if you want to learn how you can create these Playwright end-to-end tests, there's now a little bubble linking a video that shows you how to get started with Playwright CodeGen. But what happens when we now run this test? When I now head over to my terminal, I can run npx playwright test to run this test case in headless mode. And as you see, it's fairly speedy. It should succeed in only a few seconds and now took roughly 5 seconds to go to checklyhq.com and check if the email or the login validation works properly. But we now couldn't see what is actually happening, and sometimes you just want to follow along to see if your tests are doing the right thing. A quick way to enable headfull mode is go back to your terminal and run npx playwright test with the headed flag. So when we now run this, Playwright will spin up a browser and we can now follow along and see what is happening. But as you've seen, this was super speedy and I couldn't see what happened. So how could we slow down this Playwright execution? I now could spin up a debug session or debug here right in VS Code, but sometimes I really just want to slow down my tests. And I can do that by going into my Playwright config that I already have here and add some additional configuration to the use block. All it takes is going into this use block of the Playwright configuration. Now we can define launch options, and inside the launch options, we can define the SloMo attribute that accepts a delay or pause between all the actions that are included in your Playwright scripts. So when we now give it 1,000 milliseconds, we can hit save, and we will now run our test case again in headfull mode to watch the browser. This test case is now running on a human digestible speed, and we can now follow along and see what is happening in this test case. And I think this can be sometimes very valuable. If you haven't used launch options before, there are a bunch of options that you can configure for your browser sessions, so it's worth poking around and having a look. And you see here that you can also control from here if you want to run in headless or headfull mode. But coming back to the SloMo configuration, the cool thing about Playwright here is that we are now in the Playwright config, and we could now start messing around with this and start configuring when we want to have this SloMo option. So for example, we could say if there is an environment variable that's called SloMo, we will set 1,000 milliseconds. And if it is not present, we will just run with the default delay, which is 0, which is none. And I think that is pretty sweet. You could also start controlling this option from different places. So right now we are here in the use block of the general Playwright config of this repository. And if you haven't used the use config before, you can define additional configuration in 3 places. So right now we are here in the general configuration of this Playwright project. We could also take this one out here and we could go down to the specific Playwright project. So right now we have here a Chromium project that has a specific device configuration, but we could also place our launch options here and we could say, hey, that these are the SloMo test cases. And if we wouldn't want to do this, we could even go into our test cases and we can go into our login spec.ts file and we can now say that we want to use some particular configuration, which is the launch options from here. So as always with Playwright, there are plenty of ways to configure all your end-to-end test cases. So let's head over to the terminal for a final time and define the SloMo true environment variable here, call npx playwright test with the -- headed flag and see if this still works. So here we have Chromium and that looks nice and slow, human digestible. And I think this is a pretty nice deal if you want to quickly see what your Playwright tests are doing. But always keep in mind that if you really want to debug, what is happening in your Playwright tests. Playwright has plenty of tools like debugger, the VS Code extensions. So SloMo is really just a quick way to see what your tests are doing if you don't want to start a full-fledged debugging session. And this was this week's SloMo Playwright tip. If you have any questions, drop them below. And if you want to learn more about Playwright, synthetic monitoring, or Checkly, drop into the Checkly community Slack. We are a lovely bunch, and I will be back again next week with some more Playwright and synthetic monitoring tips. See you soon.